who now is watching our podcast, Happy at Work. My name is Tatiana Koval, and today we will discuss one of the hottest topics of the last years, is remote work. And my expert today is Maya Middlemiss. Hi, Maya.
Hi, Tatiana. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk about one of my favorite subjects. In fact, two of my favorite subjects, remote work and being happy at work.
That's right, Maya. Before we are starting, could you please make a short self-introduction about your professional background experience? I hope that the audience after that want to follow you and looking for a lot of usual information which you share on your LinkedIn page.
Thank you. Well, I have been working remotely since the turn of the millennium. I haven't worked in anybody else's office for a quarter of a century. So I started when it was quite unusual, definitely not a thing. And I grew my first remote team before there were any playbooks or guidance or influencers. I don't think we even had influencers back then. Since that time, I've been working, writing, consulting, creating, and supporting other people to do the same in different contexts. So I love helping teams do remote work well, helping managers and leaders create a quality working experience. And I love helping individuals make that leap as well. Because when people unlock that first job that doesn't depend on someone else telling them where they have to do it, then so many exciting things become possible. So I'm an author, speaker, consultant, journalist. I'm a storyteller at heart, really. And the stories I love to tell are about working in a location independent way.
That's great, Maya. And I hope today we will tell also some interesting stories which inspire our audience. My first questions for you, it's not about inspiration, but it's about misconception and biases that
Mm.
sometimes people, leaders, companies, and also the people, employees could have about remote work.
Yeah, there are so many, and people are starting from different places now. I mean, one huge misconception is that remote work done well looks something like what we did in 2020. No, for the most part, that was not done in a quality way. And this stems from a deeper misconception and discomfort, I think, around management and people still correlating presence with productivity and engagement. And thinking if I can't see them, they must not be working. And people still measuring the wrong things. People still have misconceptions around culture as well. They think that is dependent on proximity, on a shared location, on a kind of building or some kind of shared environment, whereas actually you can create perfectly good culture online. And indeed, it can be stronger when you unite around principles and narratives rather than just that you happen to share a break room together. And I think another important misconception is obviously you can work at home with your pets, but remote work isn't binary. It's not a case of home or office. Remote work can mean so much more when you have true flexibility with asynchronous collaboration. We have the technology now to truly work from anywhere. So there's a lot to figure out when you want to go that route. And too many people assume, I think, that remote work means one thing when it can mean a multitude of different things.
My next question is about advantages because I think it's become more and more popular, not only because of COVID, but I think because during the COVID, a lot of us understand what remote workers have a lot of advantages. Could you share with us your ideas? What advantages could it bring to the companies from one side and to the employees from another side?
Mhm. Well, I mean, thinking back to that time during COVID lockdowns, obviously I said that there was a lot that wasn't done well about remote working then. But just imagine if COVID had happened 20 years earlier in year 2000. That was when I was starting to work from home. And I had to buy all these big beige boxes and connect them together with Ethernet cables and phone people to tell them to put their internet on because I'd sent them an email. I mean, we were ready and we were actually able to carry on doing business. I know global productivity and GDP suffered greatly, but the fact that there was any continuity, I think is an immediate underline of the advantages of being able to work remotely. That included a lot of organizations and teams that would have said, no, we could never work that way. But actually, it was proven that they could. And sometimes it's not just a nice to have, it's an actual essential for continuity. It's not just in pandemics, of course. We've had lots of other situations. For example, where I live in Spain at the moment, most of the south of the country doesn't have much of a rail network due to a horrible incident. That means a lot of people can't get to work. We had the same thing here in Valencia a year and a half ago when we had the disastrous floods. We had no public transport for about a month. So working from home wasn't a luxury. It was an advantage for simple business continuity and disaster planning. We are living in a changing world, of course, and for the businesses, it goes beyond local disasters. If you have a distributed team, you have resilience simply because they're distributed. So, for example, again from Spain, it's nearly a year ago now, we had a famous day and a half where we had no electricity across the whole country. So, people working for truly distributed organizations, that was okay because their colleagues in Italy or the US or Brazil or the UK could pick up that slack and keep that conversation going. The internet was built for distributed systems and distributed connections and communications. The way we work is starting to catch up with that now, and it gives you resilience and redundancy when people can work from wherever. Now, of course, that's just for the organization. Obviously, they save on other things like the cost of renting offices, the cost of doing all of that corporate stuff, wasting time paying people to travel when there's really no need for them to travel when their work is completely digital. They pay them to come and sit in a box and do work with somebody on the other side of the country, next to somebody who's working with somebody else, and they're not connecting or collaborating together for most of the time in modern knowledge work. So there are so many organizational advantages. The cost savings is the most obvious one, but simple business continuity is another. Of course, for the individual, the advantages are huge. It means that you open up so much more choice. Your show is particularly about happiness. And for me, and I think for so many people, happiness derives so much from where you live and what choices you get to make about that. There are so many people whose lives are constrained by having to live really on the edge of a big, expensive city. They can't afford to have the lifestyle that they would choose because they have to stay in this place where it's expensive to travel. You might still have to travel for hours every day anyway. In London, I think it's about an hour and a half each way is considered the average. I mean, that's horrific. When you think how much of your life you could spend on public transport then, and then go back to a small apartment that you might have to share with somebody because you can't afford to live with the family that you love or in the environment that you would choose. So there are so many advantages to choice now, and we can truly choose. We have, I think, more than half the countries in the world now have some form of remote work or digital nomad visa. So you might be able to choose to completely change your life, go and live somewhere different, or to travel for a while to work flexibly. Many corporations now have recognition of that within their own policies. So they might have a workation policy where you can spend a certain number of weeks or months a year working away from your home location, even if they're very clear that their remote working contract means working from the same country for contractual reasons, they might support you traveling. There's been new OECD guidance on remote working and how it doesn't necessarily create permanent establishment for the business if they're not sending a person away. So really people can start to take advantage of all of these different changes and build a life that truly fulfills them. And happy, contented people are productive people.
I really like this type of policy which company could implement for improving employee happiness. And I also want to add something with my next question. If company really want to use the remote work for their employees and improving their happiness during this period, what a company and leader should remember about what he or she should focus on for making the remote work is really productive from one side, and from the other side, less stressful, and bringing more happiness to employees who want and could work remotely? What companies should focus on? What steps and what tips could you give to the companies?
That's a huge question. And I know you said we're going to keep it to half an hour, so I won't turn it into a year-long lecture. This is the most important thing to remember is that a lot of things that happen in remote work have to be designed, they have to be intentional. Stuff that happens organically, accidentally, by osmosis in offices, that doesn't happen. And if you take away the office, the container, you have to build these things to make remote work successful. When I work with teams, when I work with managers, I've distilled down to a 5 element framework. And generally, all of these areas require attention in one way or another. So it's important that everything gets addressed. The first area is culture, and culture, as we said, doesn't depend on a building or a shared location, but it does mean that remote teams have to design their culture, they have to create it, they have to embody it, they have to share it. And that goes right to when somebody is first looking at joining them. What kind of messages do they put out as an employer brand? It's less tangible in remote teams, but it means you can be creative, you can design what you want. Teams then have to figure out how they're going to communicate because they're not going to bump into each other walking down a corridor or in a lift or a break room. They have to decide on the means of communication, the style. Are they going to spend a lot of time in synchronous calls like this, like you and I are, or are they going to use more asynchronous communication, which tends to be document based, but can also include rich media? Like if you're watching this broadcast on another day, you're consuming it asynchronously, you can still learn from it, and we're flowing information from one to another. Teams can adopt a blend of both. People need to know what to use, what's the correct channel. What areas are confidential versus transparent and open? When is it okay to ask? Who should I ask about this? Where should I search for this? It's all part of how teams communicate. And again, that has to be deliberately designed because you can't say, oh, just go and shadow that person over there. You're going to be doing similar work for them. So just watch what they're doing, unless they're narrating what they're doing, which is definitely one way to support and onboard somebody, then that's not going to work. So they have to get that right as well. The third element in the framework I call console, which is really about the technology. It's about the hardware, the software, the systems that underlie it all. And for the remote worker, that means being able to have a degree of tech competency. You don't have to be an expert, but you have to be able to get online and get help, figure things out, know what security risks to avoid, and so on. So that's all critical as well, because that leads to good collaboration, which is how you actually add value, because you can have all of the greatest ways of communicating that you want, but unless you're actually tracking who's doing what and how projects are being moved forward, whether there are resource constraints, what the deadlines are, who's contributing what, you're not collaborating. And that can also be an issue. It's partly a console issue as to how you manage that, but unless people are actually interacting with each other and getting the work done, you don't have a business at the end of the day. And finally, that depends on connection. And that's the relationships between individuals, between managers and their reports, how people give feedback, how people connect with one another, how they fill in the gaps in the communication, because you don't necessarily see the body language, the mood, the dreams, the withdrawal, all the little micro movements that define people's interactions in a face-to-face environment. So those are the things that managers have to pay attention to. And I would say the whole team has to pay attention to, because they don't happen automatically in remote work, but you can create them exactly how you want them to be.
I want to ask you another third. It's about skills which we need for remote work. I want to ask you also about both sides from the leaders. I know what in the era of
Mm,
remote work we need some special skills, at least self-organizing
yeah.
and so on. So, what could you recommend for leaders? Which skills they need to improve for managing effectively remote workers? And for other side, Is that people want to be a very productive, effective, and highly demand remote worker. Which skills he or she need to develop?
That's really interesting because I wrote a whole book about this. Well, I wrote a whole book for each of those people. And starting with the leaders, the most interesting thing is that there are still a great many very senior leaders who don't have a lot of experience of managing distributed teams. They have built their career in the decades before it was even possible to manage armies of people that you don't set eyes on at a distance. And so often the whole way you manage has to shift. What are you actually managing? You're not managing a process anymore. You're not managing time. You have to shift everything around to the outcomes, the deliverables. Because if your KPIs are designed around people putting in time, then you're going to be anxious all the time because you can't see what they're doing. And you'll want to turn it round into an atmosphere of surveillance. And that leads to a lack of trust and that leads to a lack of engagement. Whereas if you focus on what people are actually delivering, you get closer to the bottom line anyway, because your role as a leader is going to be to affect some transformation, whether that's a knowledge output for your clients or shipping a product or selling a certain number of items and generating profit. Those are the things that actually matter in your business. And if you redesign everybody's KPIs to align with that, then they can do that work forever from anywhere. They can do it at the time of day that suits them best, quite often, depending how interdependent their activities are. They can do it from any location. They can do it in any manner that they like. And what matters is what you're tracking, is how do they actually add value at the end of the day. Now, that's huge for a manager to let go of all the process stuff in between. Well, I don't think you should do it like that. And this is the way we do it. And this is how we do it in this organization. And this firm has this particular rules and roles. It means letting go of all of that, trusting people, giving them the end goals, providing them with enough resource to do what they need to do, making it completely clear how to do their thing and create that value, and then tracking that. And I think that's the biggest challenge for leaders, is to let go of the things that they used to measure, to from surveilling people all the time to trusting them and letting them earn that trust, but also document it and prove it, setting up the systems that make that trust visible, make people accountable, not just to the leaders, but to each other within a team. That really matters as well. It means being really explicit about what the expectations are. So that's through some form of documentation, some single source of truth, that everybody knows this is how we do it and why. And these are the parameters within which we can operate. And if we go outside of this, we need permission for that, or we need to check this. And then that makes you have a really resilient and elastic system that works. It might mean, and sometimes I have to say this to leaders, it might mean you need fewer managers to get the same results, because the technology that we have now to manage all of this can actually make insight visible on so many different levels that it can be that fewer people or fewer layers are needed within an organization to deliver that value. That's not to say that I think fewer people should be working, but there might be other things those managers could be doing that are actually more productive and contributing more to the end goal, or spending more time with clients and so on. So it's really about managing time as a resource and seeing the outputs that you really need to measure. And when it comes to the employees, they need to demonstrate they can do all that they can work in that way, that they can show up. And again, the Remote Readiness for Job Seekers book, which has just come out a couple of weeks ago, flips that whole 5 C's framework to what can I do as an employee or a potential employee who is seeking remote work? How can I demonstrate my competency and my awareness across all of those aspects? How can I show how I fit into the culture, what I can contribute to the culture? How can I show that I can use communication tools, that I can follow a protocol effectively, that I have the tech savvy to do my work, not to break anything or leak anything, not to bring my organization into disrepute, how I collaborate with others, how I build relationships with people that I don't get to sit down and have coffee with all the time. So all of those are skills that employees need to demonstrate, because the trust that you need in remote hiring is huge. When I started doing remote hiring, the one thing I couldn't do was hire anybody who'd worked that way before. So I had to find other clues to their competencies. Now we're in this weird situation where there still aren't nearly enough remote roles compared to the demand for them. Some people have had some experience of working remotely to a lesser or greater extent, even if it was 6 months during 2020. So managers can be a lot more choosy about who they want to recruit. And often it's safer for them to go with somebody who can already say, look, I've worked for this fully remote organization. Here's my track record. So, what I try to do with Remote Work Europe and in our connected book club that we're starting next week, we're going through the job seeker book one chapter at a time, is to help people really work out their own way of showing up for each of those five competencies. How can I demonstrate that in my LinkedIn profile, in my CV, in my selfies, in my social media posts, in my cover letters, in my comments around LinkedIn? All of these things are ways, the clues that a hirer will look at. And it won't even be a human necessarily. You say to ChatGPT, tell me all about Tatiana Koval. Is she a good remote worker? And everything that you've put out there will be part of that mixture. So it is really important that people pay attention to that. So it's a really core theme in remote readiness for both the leaders and the job seekers.
That's I think all things you cover. It's really important for both sides, and I think it's really, really important to remember about these two both sides. So for company and leaders and for employees. My next question is for you from the company's perspective. You mentioned, I think, no, I think two, three, five times about culture. And I think it's really, really important from a company's perspective, but also from an employee's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And which rituals, maybe which tools could you recommend for companies, for the employees, for building really strong culture, which become a clue for the team? From company side, it's important for be sure what all employees understand the company's value and will going every times align with these values. From other side, from the employees, it's to me it's important to be a part of the team, to feel themselves included in something which more when his own private life. What could you recommend to companies who want to build this culture from achieving the results for both sides, company and the employee?
I think it starts with a lot of self-reflection. Culture tends to come from the leaders, from the founders, at least initially. And sometimes it's not the most examined part when a company is scaling fast. It might start off really small with a couple of co-founders and they're building like mad and they're shipping and they're scaling. And suddenly they've got this team of people or teams of people, and they haven't really had enough time to step back and think about their culture, to think about their why. Because in the first few years of hiring, then the founders are probably doing those interviews and they're thinking, yeah, that person, they get it, they're going to fit in here. They don't have to articulate it any more than that because there's a lot of instinctive stuff going on there. But as they get further and further from that process, and in the end, it's an HR manager doing the hiring or a department leader, these people have no idea what they're coming into. And also, the leaders don't have any idea about what people are bringing into that organization. So, at that point, if they haven't done it before, they really need to take a beat, step back from the day to day activity. I know it's hard in any fast growing organization, but you really have to make the time somehow to sit down and think about it and actually express it, debate it if you need to, because two or three co-founders might all have quite close visions, but they might not be exactly the same. There might be times where we say, no, we value this over that. And let's make that explicit. What does that look like in the day to day of what we deliver, how we work together as a team, how we support and respect our colleagues? And to take a bit of time, maybe with an external facilitator, and just simply work through that, get it all written down, look at it. Don't then put it in a drawer and forget about it or put it in a document on a drive somewhere. Think about how that's going to show up in every aspect of what you deliver. Because if I'm a prospective employee and I'm thinking, well, that looks like a really interesting job ad, but I don't know anything about the organization. And I tell you a secret, most of the really interesting, fully remote organizations are not ones you will have heard of. The famous ones, they all get 3,000 applications for any entry level job. So they can pick whoever they want. But when you see a company you've never heard of hiring, don't dismiss it because there's lots of great opportunities to be found there. But you might well think, well, I don't know anything about who are they? What do they stand for? So that's the time to start doing your research as an applicant and start to really understand the vision behind them. And sometimes it's easy. They're very, very clear about what they stand for. And then you can make a decision. Well, is this culture for me or not? Because every time that you join an organization, you do a certain amount of fitting in, fitting yourself. You know, how am I going to slot into what they're expecting here? And indeed, a lot of the job application process is persuading somebody that I can fit in. Not only am I technically competent to do whatever it is, I'm going to be motivated to do it because I'm going to fit in here. I'm going to be at home culturally. However, the flip side of that is that we work in teams as a rule. You might think, well, what's one person in an organization of 2,000 people? You're not going to change anything there. But actually, within that content marketing delivery team, where there's 8 of you, one person makes a big difference. They contribute actively to the culture as well as fitting in. So, forward looking managers are hiring for culture contribution as well and improving the diversity of their teams by looking for people to bring something that they haven't got yet. And if you do that well, you can really be additive to a culture so that you feel settled within it, but you can grow. And you can grow connection with your colleagues. You can take that team somewhere else. And those are the people who will have a lasting, sustainable remote career. So culture isn't static. Culture isn't something you do once. You figure it right. We know what our culture is. That's finished. Culture has to be embodied and it has to be authentic. You know, if you have all these values on your website and your mission, and then actually the way the leaders are behaving and what they're communicating doesn't really match up, then that not only makes it woolly and confusing, it makes it quite unsettling for the whole team and certainly for any prospective employees. They're thinking, what am I joining? You know, you say that your values are of diversity, but your entire board is male and white, for example. You know, where is the diversity showing up here? And these are legitimate things that you need to question whether you want to join that organization, whether you're going to question that during the application process, whether you want that job so badly you're going to keep your mouth shut and really show up for culture fit, um, or whether you're going to decide that actually I can't contribute to this organization. There's not a match here. I'm not going to bang my head against somebody else's glass ceiling. I'll take my talents somewhere else because we're talking about remote work. Remember, if that organization isn't quite right, then you have to find the next one and you have the whole world from which to do that. So culture really matters both ways. It's one of the strongest things to draw a team together when everything else is being difficult, when the tech isn't working and the client's being a pain and everything's struggling with deadlines. The culture is what's going to keep you together and keep you strong. And companies really need to invest in building that, sustaining it, and living it and manifesting it. And then you'll get the people who are happy in their work, and that's a win-win for everybody.
Well, thanks a lot for the conversation. I think we need more and more time for discussing this very interesting and important topic. And I also could recommend to our audience to read your book, which you mentioned in the
Thank you.
beginning, of going deeply. And my last questions for you, so usual questions for all my guests, is what 3 main tips could you give to all employees which want to use the remote work effectively and making it the way which improve the happiness of their employees? What 3 main tips could you give?
Recommendations for employers then were first of all trust, default to trust, and then verify the outcome. Don't manage the work and surveil people, but look what they do. So start with trust, then document everything as part of that process. Make sure people know what it's supposed to look like. So if it's not written down, then it doesn't exist. If there's not a record of a conversation, it's really easy now. Like you could have a conversation like this and record it and then get an AI to pull out what was decided, what was done. So make sure you do your documentation. And then design for connection and culture. These things don't happen accidentally. You have to create the meeting points, the serendipity, the connections. Relationships don't happen by chance in remote. They have to be built, they have to be cultivated, they have to be nurtured, and that will create the kind of behaviors that you want to see.
Maya, thanks a lot for all your tips. Thanks a lot for sharing your knowledge, your experience about remote work to our audience.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you for doing all that you do to promote happiness at work.
Thanks a lot. This is podcast Happy at Work. My name is Tatiana Kovan. Stay tuned.